A wild horse, feared by everyone and impossible to tame, becomes the center of a multi-million-dollar bet. Until, against all odds, a one-legged boy does the unthinkable. The sun rose lazily on the horizon of Dry Creek, painting the Texas sky with golden brushstrokes that spread across the parched plains. At the entrance to Victory Ranch, a crowd had already gathered since the early hours of the morning, as if sensing that this day would be different from all others. Andrew Miller adjusted his weathered leather hat and climbed onto the wooden crate he had ordered to be positioned right in the center of the corral. At 52, he was an imposing man, with broad shoulders and a penetrating gaze that could make anyone lower their head, with just a furrowed brow. His reputation as a tough man spread throughout the Texas hill country, and there wasn't anyone who hadn't heard stories about his explosive temper and his insatiable thirst for power. "My friends," he shouted, raising his right hand to silence the murmurs of the crowd. His deep voice echoed through the corrals, making even the calves fall. "Silent? Today I'm making a bet that will go down in the history of this town." The men in hats drew closer, curious. The women held their small children tighter, and even the merchants from the neighboring town stopped counting money to pay attention to what the most feared rancher in the region had to say. "Whoever can tame my thunder," Andrew continued, pointing to the adjacent corral where the furious beating of hooves against wood could be heard, "takes home $1 million. The silence that followed was broken only by the savage neighing coming from the pen. Thunder wasn't an ordinary horse. He was a force of nature, an animal that seemed to have been born with the devil in its body. His fiery eyes, the black mane, that flew like flames in the wind, and the hooves that made the earth tremble when they hit the ground, had become living legend in those remote parts. "But I warned you," Andrew laughed, crossing his arms. "I won't accept any whining afterward. If you fall, you fell. If you get hurt, that's your problem. And if you don't have the guts, don't even come near." The crowd began to whisper. Some laughed nervously, others shook their heads in disapproval. Everyone knew the stories about Thunder. The last cowboy who tried to ride him spent 3 weeks in the town hospital with broken ribs and shattered pride. On the other side of town, at Joe's Market, Jack Gardner was sweeping the sidewalk when he heard the news on the battery-powered radio that was always on at the counter. His ears perked up when he heard those words, $1 million. Jack was 12 years old but carried on his shoulders the weight of someone who had already lived much longer. His skinny body contrasted with the determination that shone in his brown eyes. The wooden and leather prosthesis that replaced his left leg didn't stop him from working from dawn until dusk, helping to support the house where he lived with Grandma Sophie. "Did you hear that, my boy?" asked Joe, adjusting his glasses on the tip of his nose. "That damned Andrew wants to see someone break themselves just to feed his ego." Jack continued sweeping, but his mind was flying far away. $1 million. It was enough money to buy medicine for Grandma Sophie's cough, fix the roof that leaked during the rainy season, buy a real prosthesis, maybe even study in the city. It was the chance of a lifetime. "Mr. Joe," said Jack, stopping sweeping, "do you think this horse is really as wild as they say?" The shopkeeper laughed, shaking his head. "My son, that beast has thrown experienced cowboys who couldn't even count how many bulls they'd tamed in their lives. It's a possessed animal, I tell you. No Christian can handle it." But Jack couldn't get that idea out of his head. All day, while washing Mrs. Mary's backyard, selling popsicles in the square, and helping unload trucks at the warehouse, he could only think about that horse and that money. When he arrived home at dusk, he found Grandma Sophie sitting in her rocking chair, knitting a small sweater to sell at the fair. "Grandma," he said, sitting on the floor beside her, "have you ever heard of Andrew Miller's Thunder?" Grandma Sophie stopped knitting and looked fixedly at her grandson. Her eyes, marked by years and tears, seemed to shine with a strange light. "Why do you want to know about that, my boy?" Jack told her about the bet, about the money, about the chance to change their lives. Grandma Sophie listened in silence, just rocking slowly in her chair. "Jack Gardner," she said finally, placing her calloused hand on her grandson's face. "Sometimes fate puts challenges in front of us that seem impossible, but when the heart speaks louder than reason, we discover that we're capable of things we never imagined." That night, Jack could barely sleep. He sat on the doorstep, looking at the stars and imagining what it would be like to ride that wild horse. It seemed crazy, but something inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, he could do it. When the rooster crowed announcing the new day, Jack Gardner was already up, wearing his best clothes and adjusting the worn cap that had belonged to his mother. With determined steps, even if wobbling because of the prosthesis, he began the walk toward Victory Ranch, carrying in his chest a hope that even he couldn't explain. The walk to Victory Ranch seemed endless under the scorching Texas sun. Jack Gardner followed the dirt road, feeling sweat drip down his forehead and the prosthesis bothering him with every step. But his determination was greater than any physical discomfort. As he approached the ranch, the sounds became more intense. Shouts, laughter, furious neighs, and the dull beating of hooves against wood echoed through the air. When he finally reached the gate, he came upon a scene that looked more like a battlefield. Several men were scattered on the ground, some groaning in pain, others simply looking at the sky as if trying to understand what had happened. In the center of the corral, Thunder circled like a black hurricane, rearing, neighing, and beating his hooves with a fury that made the earth tremble. "Look who showed up," someone from the crowd shouted upon spotting Jack. "Even a cripple wants to be a cowboy now." The laughter spread like wildfire. Men in hats pointed and made cruel comments. Women whispered among themselves, and even some children laughed at the situation. Jack felt his face heat up, but kept his head high and continued walking. Andrew, who was leaning on the fence watching yet another failed attempt to tame Thunder, turned around when he heard the commotion. When he saw Jack approaching, his eyes narrowed and a sarcastic smile formed on his lips. "What's this, boy?" he asked, coming down from the fence and walking toward Jack. "Did you come to see real men work, or are you lost?" "I came to accept your challenge," Jack replied, his voice firm despite his nervousness. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Thunder seemed to stop to hear those words. Then the laughter exploded even louder, more cruel, more humiliating. "Accept." "My challenge?" Andrew laughed so hard he had to hold his stomach. "Boy, did you see what this horse did to experienced cowboys? You don't even have 2 legs. Imagine riding Thunder." "The bet didn't say anything about having 2 legs," Jack retorted. Surprising everyone with his courage, Andrew stopped laughing. His eyes became as cold as ice. "Listen here, kid, this isn't child's play. That horse has already sent strong men to the hospital. What do you think he would do with a little cripple like you?" "There's only one way to find out." Jack stepped forward. The crowd began to stir. Some shouted that it was cowardly to let a child try. Others bet how many seconds Jack would last before being thrown far. But there was something in the boy's determination that began to bother even the most mocking. It was then that Beth appeared on the porch of the main house. She was Andrew's wife, an elegant woman with gray hair and deep eyes that carried the weight of many secrets. She held an antique necklace with engraved initials against her chest, and her eyes couldn't turn away from Jack. "Andrew!" she called from the porch, her voice trembling. "Let the boy try." Andrew turned around, surprised. "Beth, have you gone crazy? I won't take the responsibility of seeing a child get hurt here on my property." "He wants to try," she insisted, coming down the porch steps. "And you made a bet for anyone who could tame Thunder. You didn't specify age." Jack took advantage of the couple's discussion to approach the corral where Thunder was. The horse was even more impressive up close. His defined muscles gleamed with sweat, the black mane flew like a war flag, and his eyes seemed to hold an almost human intelligence. "Hey, kid!" shouted one of the cowboys. "Get out of there! That beast is dangerous!" But Jack didn't move. He continued looking directly at Thunder, and something extraordinary happened. The horse, which until then had seemed like an uncontrolled demon, simply stopped. His eyes met Jack's, and for a moment that seemed eternal. It was as if an invisible connection had been established between them. The crowd noticed the change. The shouts ceased, the laughter died, and even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Thunder slowly approached the fence without taking his eyes off Jack. There was no more fury in his gaze, only a deep curiosity, as if trying to decipher who was this small and different being who dared to stare at him without fear. "My God in heaven," someone from the crowd murmured. "The horse is tame." Jack slowly extended his hand toward Thunder. The horse sniffed. The air approached his muzzle to the fence and, to everyone's amazement, allowed Jack to touch his forehead. It was a gentle touch, almost reverent, as if both knew that this moment would change their lives forever. Andrew watched the scene with growing incredulity and anger. This couldn't be happening. Thunder was his trump card, his way of showing that he was superior to everyone in the region. Seeing a crippled boy achieve what no one else had was a humiliation that he wasn't willing to accept. "That doesn't prove anything," he shouted, furious. "Anyone can pet a horse over the fence. The challenge is to ride, and it won't be a crippled kid. Who makes me look like a fool?" Beth came closer, her eyes full of tears that she tried to contain. There was something about that boy that touched every fiber of her being, something that she couldn't explain, but that made her remember times she had tried to forget. Jack continued caressing Thunder, and the horse seemed increasingly calm, as if it had found something it had been looking for a long time. The connection between them was so evident that even the most skeptical began to question their own convictions. "I'll ride him tomorrow," Jack announced, turning to Andrew, "and when I succeed, I want my money." The boy's last words echoed through the corral like a challenge that could no longer be ignored, sealing a fate that would forever change the history of that ranch. The next morning brought an even larger crowd. The news that a disabled boy had managed to calm Thunder had spread through the region like wildfire, and people from all over came to Victory Ranch to witness what many considered impossible. Jack arrived early, even before the sun had fully risen. He had spent the night restless, dreaming of wild eyes and neighs that echoed in his mind. Grandma Sophie accompanied him to the ranch gate, her trembling hands holding a rosary worn by time. "Go with God, my boy," she whispered, kissing her grandson's forehead. "And remember, sometimes strength isn't in the muscles, but in the heart." Andrew had been in the corral since dawn, pacing back and forth like a caged lion. With each passing minute, his irritation grew. He had spent the entire night thinking of a way to cancel that ridiculous bet, but knew his reputation would be ruined if he backed out now. "Beth," he called to his wife, who was watching everything from the porch, "are you sure you want to let this happen? If that kid gets hurt here, we'll have trouble." Beth came down the steps slowly, still holding the necklace with the engraved initials. Her eyes were red, as if she had cried all night. "Andrew," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "some encounters are determined by fate. I feel that this is one of them." "Fate?" he laughed bitterly. "The only fate he'll have is to be thrown far and learn not to meddle where he's not called." The crowd began to stir when Jack appeared. Some applauded him, impressed by his courage. Others shook, their heads in disapproval. But everyone fell silent when he approached the corral where Thunder was waiting. The horse seemed different that morning. His eyes, which had always carried fury and defiance, now showed an almost human expectation. When he saw Jack, he approached the fence as if recognizing him from a lifetime. "Good morning, Thunder," said Jack softly, extending his hand to caress the animal's muzzle. "Are you ready?" Thunder snorted softly, a sound that seemed more like agreement. Jack took a deep breath and, with the help of some crates, managed to climb the fence. The crowd held their breath as he began to descend into the corral. "Stop! That," shouted Andrew, advancing toward the fence. "I don't allow a child to go in there." But it was too late. Jack was already in the corral, face to face with Thunder. The horse watched him with those deep eyes, as if he could see beyond physical appearance, beyond disability, beyond everything that others saw. Slowly, Jack placed his hand on Thunder's neck. The horse didn't move. Carefully, he came closer, whispering words that only the two of them could understand. It was as if they spoke the same ancestral language, a language that needed no words. "This is impossible," murmured one of the most experienced cowboys. "I've never seen anything like it." Jack positioned himself beside Thunder, and in a movement that surprised everyone with its naturalness, mounted the horse. The crowd exploded in shouts of astonishment and admiration. Some men took off their hats in respect. Women made the sign of the cross, and even the children stopped playing to watch. Thunder remained motionless for a few seconds as if deciding what to do. Then, slowly, he began to walk around the corral. There was no fury, no attempt to throw the rider. It was a smooth, almost ceremonial walk, as if both knew that this moment was sacred. Andrew watched the scene with a mixture of incredulity and anger that made his face as red as a pepper. This couldn't be happening. Thunder was his horse, trained to be untamable, to show the superiority of Victory Ranch. Seeing a crippled boy achieve what no experienced cowboy had was a humiliation that hurt more than any physical injury. "This is cheating," he shouted, punching the air. "You drugged my horse. It's not possible." But his words sounded empty in the face of the evidence. Jack rode Thunder as if they had been born for each other. The boy radiated pure, genuine happiness, as if he had finally found his place in the world. Beth approached the fence, tears flowing freely down her face. Her hands trembled so much that she could barely hold the necklace. There was something in that scene that awakened memories buried long ago, memories that she had tried to erase, but that now returned with full force. "Beth," called a neighbor, "are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," she murmured, without taking her eyes off Jack. The boy completed several laps around the corral, and with each lap, the connection between him and Thunder seemed to strengthen. It was as if they were two parts of the same being that finally reunited. The crowd watched in respectful silence, witnessing something they knew they would not see again in their lives. When Jack finally dismounted from Thunder, the horse followed him to the fence, reluctant to part from him. The boy caressed the animal's muzzle one last time and turned to face Andrew. "I did it," he said simply. "I want my money." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. All eyes turned to Andrew, awaiting his reaction. The rancher clenched his fists, his face a mask of hatred and frustration. "You didn't achieve anything," he exploded. "That was luck, a coincidence. My horse must be sick." "Your horse is in perfect condition," said a calm but firm voice. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Dr. Ernest, the region's veterinarian, who had arrived to examine some animals on the ranch. "I observed everything," he continued. "That horse is in perfect health. What happened here was something extraordinary, something that goes beyond our understanding." The boy completed the challenge. The crowd began to murmur in agreement. Some shouted that the bet had been won, others applauded Jack. The pressure on Andrew grew with each second. It was then that Beth approached her husband, her tears still flowing. "Andrew," she said, her voice laden with emotion, "pay the boy. He won honestly." "Beth, have you gone crazy?" "No," she shook her head, looking directly at Jack. "For the first time in a long time, I'm seeing things clearly." The tone in her voice carried something that made even Andrew hesitate, as if she knew something he didn't, something that was about to change everything. That afternoon, while the crowd dispersed, still commenting on what had happened, Andrew locked himself in his office, refusing to speak to anyone. Through the window, he watched Jack saying goodbye to Thunder, a scene that made his blood boil with anger. "1,000 reasons not to pay," he muttered, pacing back and forth among the solid wood furniture. "That kid must have used some trick, some gimmick. Nobody can tame Thunder like that out of nowhere." Knocking on the door interrupted his thoughts. Beth entered without waiting for a response, bringing a tray with coffee and cookies. Her face still bore the marks of tears shed. "Andrew, we need to talk," she said, placing the tray on the desk. "If it's about that farce today, I don't want to hear it," he replied, without turning around. "I'm going to find a way to cancel this ridiculous bet." Beth approached the window and stood beside her husband, watching Jack, who was still talking to Thunder at the fence. "Don't you see?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Don't you see who that boy is?" "I see a crippled kid trying to take advantage of us," Andrew grumbled. "Look at him properly, Andrew," Beth insisted, holding her husband's arm. "Look at his eyes, at the way he smiles, at the determination he has. Don't you remember anyone?" Andrew finally turned to his wife, irritated by her insistence. "What are you talking about, woman? You seem to have gone crazy since you saw that boy." Beth took the necklace from her neck and showed it to her husband. The engraved initials shone in the sunlight coming through the window, AM plus MG. "Do you remember this initial?" she asked. Pointing to the MG, Andrew went pale. It had been more than 15 years since he had seen that necklace, more than 15 years since they had spoken about that matter. "Beth, don't you dare." He began but was interrupted. "Mary Grace," she said, pronouncing each word as if it were a prayer. "You remember her, don't you? The woman you loved before you met me?" "Shut up," Andrew exploded. "That's the past. It has nothing to do with anything." "It has everything to do with it." Beth raised her voice, something rare in her, usually contained personality. "Mary Grace, who worked here on the ranch, whom you dated in secret, who got pregnant and left when you chose to marry me out of interest." Andrew grabbed his wife by the shoulders, his eyes full of fury. "You swore. You'd never speak of this again. You swore." "Oaths are broken when truth knocks at our door," she replied, freeing herself from his hands. "That boy has the same eyes as Mary Grace, the same smile, the same determination. Even the way he talks reminds me of her." Andrew stepped back, as if he had been punched in the stomach. "You're delirious. Mary Grace left here 15 years ago. We never heard from her again." "She left pregnant," Beth began to cry again, "pregnant with your child that you never wanted to acknowledge. And now I'm sure that boy is your grandson." The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew staggered to the armchair and sat, down heavily, as if the entire weight of the world had fallen on his shoulders. "This is impossible," he murmured. "Impossible." "Remember when you told me that Mary Grace had a special gift with animals," Beth continued, "that she could calm any wild horse, any skittish bull? You said she seemed to have a magical connection with the animals." Andrew raised his eyes, and for the first time since Beth had entered the office, she saw fear in his gaze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the gift passed to the grandson. That boy has the same gift that Mary Grace had. That's why he managed to tame Thunder. That's why the horse calmed down when it saw him. It was as if it recognized family." Outside, Jack was saying goodbye to Thunder with the promise to return the next day to collect the bet money. The horse was reluctant to see him leave, following him as far as the fence allowed. "I'll be back tomorrow, Thunder," said Jack, caressing the animal's muzzle, "and then we can be together forever." Thunder snorted softly, as if understanding. Every word. Grandma Sophie was waiting for her grandson at the gate, anxious to know how the day had gone. "So, my boy, did you succeed?" "I did, Grandma," Jack smiled radiantly. "I rode Thunder and he was gentle with me. Tomorrow I'm going to collect the money and our life will change." Grandma Sophie hugged her grandson, but her eyes were worried. She knew well the nature of men like Andrew, and knew that they didn't easily accept defeat. "Jack Gardner," she said, holding the boy's face between her hands, "you need to be careful. Powerful men don't like to be contradicted." "But I won honestly, Grandma." "Everyone saw it. I know, my boy. But what is fair isn't always what happens." As they walked home, Grandma Sophie murmured a quiet prayer, asking for protection for her grandson and wisdom to deal with what was to come. In the ranch office, Andrew remained silent, digesting his wife's words. If she was right, if that boy was really his grandson, then everything would change. His reputation, his position in the community, everything would be at risk. "Beth," he said finally, "even if you're right, it doesn't change anything. I won't recognize any bastard child, much less pay $1 million to him." "Andrew," she began, but he interrupted her. "You're going to forget this conversation, and I'm going to find a way to resolve this situation. That boy won't take a penny from here." Beth looked at her husband with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "You've always been a hard man, Andrew. But I never thought you would be capable of denying your own family." "I have no family besides you," he replied coldly, "and you'd better not forget that." But even as he spoke those words, Andrew knew that something had changed forever that day, and that the past he had tried to bury was resurfacing in ways he had never imagined. Dawn brought a tense atmosphere to Victory Ranch. During the night, Andrew had devised a plan to get out of his commitment to Jack, and now he was putting everything into action. "Sam," he called, beckoning to the ranch foreman, "I want you to take Thunder to the farthest pasture. No one else will have access to this horse." Sam, a trusted man for more than 20 years, hesitated. "Boss, but what about the boy? Won't he come to collect the money today?" "Let him come." Andrew smiled maliciously. "But he won't find any horse here. Kelsey Thunder escaped during the night." "But boss, everyone saw what happened yesterday. People won't believe that." "People believe what I tell them to believe," Andrew exploded. "Now go do what I ordered, or do you want to look for another job?" Sam lowered his head and headed toward the corral where Thunder was. But when he tried to approach the horse, something strange happened. The animal, which had always been difficult to handle, simply refused to move. It planted its feet, neighing and showing a resistance that even Sam had never seen before. "Come on, Thunder," the foreman insisted, holding the rope. "You have to come with me." But Thunder shook his head vigorously, as if understanding that something was wrong. His eyes searched for something, someone who wasn't there. Meanwhile, Jack walked along the dirt road, anxious to reach the ranch. He had spent the night dreaming of everything he would do with the bet money. He would buy medicine for Grandma Sophie, fix the house, maybe even get a better prosthesis. "Jack Gardner," a voice called him from the road. He turned and saw Connie, the town midwife, running toward him with an envelope in her hands. "Boy, I'm glad I found you. I have something important to give you." "What is it, Miss Connie?" The elderly woman took a deep breath before speaking, her eyes shining with emotion. "Yesterday, after seeing you ride that horse, I couldn't stop thinking. You reminded me so much of someone, and then I remembered this." She handed the time-yellowed envelope to Jack. "Your mother gave this to me before she passed from this life. She asked me to keep it and give it to you when you grew up. I think the time has come." With trembling hands, Jack opened the envelope. Inside was an old photo and a handwritten letter. In the photo, a young and beautiful woman smiled beside a horse. Her eyes were identical to Jack's. "My mother?" he asked, his voice choking. "Mary Grace," confirmed Connie, "the bravest woman I've ever known, and who had a special gift with animals, just like you showed yesterday." Jack began to read the letter with tears in his eyes. "My dear son, if you are reading this, it's because you've already grown up and discovered the gift you carry in your heart. I know life hasn't been easy for you, but know that you are a child of love, even if that love wasn't acknowledged. You have the blood of strong people, people who never give up. Use your gift for good, to help those in need, and never let anyone make you feel small. You are greater than you imagine. With all my love, your mother, Mary Grace." "Miss Connie," said Jack, wiping away his tears, "my mother, did she really know my father?" The midwife looked toward Victory Ranch with a somber expression. "Yes, she did. But that's a story you'll have to discover on your own, my boy. I can only tell you one thing. The most powerful men aren't always the most honorable." When Jack arrived at the ranch, he found an even larger crowd than the day before. The news that he had tamed Thunder had spread throughout the region, and people from various towns had come to see the boy who had achieved the impossible. "Where's my money?" Jack asked directly to Andrew, who was waiting on the porch of the main house. "What money, boy?" he replied, pretending not to understand. "You didn't tame any horse." "What do you mean? Everyone here saw it." "Oh, you're talking about that little act yesterday," Andrew laughed. "Well, Thunder escaped during the night. Seems he didn't like the game very much." A murmur of indignation took over the crowd. Several people shouted that it was unfair that they had witnessed Jack's feat. "That's a lie," shouted Joe, who had closed his market to support Jack. "That boy tamed your horse honestly." "Prove it," Andrew challenged. "Where's the horse?" There's no horse, there's no bet one." It was then that a familiar neigh echoed through the corrals. Everyone turned to see Thunder galloping freely through the nearby pasture, clearly upset at having been taken far away. The horse had managed to break free and had returned on its own to where Jack was. "Thunder!" shouted Jack, running toward the horse. The animal stopped immediately upon seeing the boy, trotting in his direction with evident joy. The crowd observed in respectful silence while Jack caressed Thunder's muzzle, and the horse responded with affectionate snorts. He came. "Back for you," said Dr. Ernest, impressed. "I've never seen anything like it. It's as if you two were family." completed a female voice. Everyone turned to see Beth coming down the porch steps, carrying an old suitcase in her hands. Her face was determined, as if she had made an important decision. "Andrew," she said, facing her husband, "enough lies, enough trying to hide the truth. Beth, go back inside," he ordered, nervous about the direction things were taking. "I won't go back." She opened the suitcase and took out several old photos. "Jack Gardner, come here." The boy approached, curious. Beth showed the photos, all of a young and beautiful woman next to horses. "This is your mother, Mary Grace. She worked here on the ranch 15 years ago." Jack compared the photos with the one he had received from Connie. It was the same woman, without a doubt. "And this," Beth pointed to a photo where the woman appeared next to a young man, "is your father." The crowd came closer to better see the photo. The young man was clearly Andrew, 15 years younger, smiling next to Mary Grace. "Lies!" shouted Andrew, trying to grab the photos. "These photos are fake." "They're real, and you know it," replied Beth, protecting the photos. "Jack Gardner is your grandson, Andrew, and you're going to pay what you owe him." The silence that followed was charged with tension. All eyes turned to Andrew, waiting for his reaction. The man who had always been respected and feared in the region now found himself exposed before the entire community. "I don't recognize any bastard," he exploded, his eyes full of hatred. "And I won't pay anything to anyone." But his revolt sounded empty in the face of the evidence. The crowd began to stir, and many shouted that he should keep his word. The pressure was becoming unbearable, and Andrew knew he needed to act quickly before he completely lost control of the situation. The tension in the air was palpable. Andrew looked at the crowd surrounding him, feeling for the first time in his life the weight of public opinion against him. Men who had previously respected him now looked at him with disapproval. Women commented loudly about his dishonesty, and even the children seemed to understand that something very serious was happening. "You don't understand," Andrew shouted, trying to regain control. "I'm the one who gives the orders here. This is my ranch, my property. Nobody is going to tell me what to do." "It's not about giving orders, Andrew," said Father Anthony, who had arrived after hearing about the commotion. "It's about honoring a given word. You made a public bet and the boy fulfilled his part." "Father, you don't understand the situation," Andrew began, but was interrupted. "I understand perfectly." The priest approached Jack, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "I see a brave boy who faced an impossible challenge and won, and I see a man who doesn't want to honor his word." Beth approached her husband, her dried tears giving way to an iron determination. "Andrew, you have a chance to do the right thing, to recognize your grandson and give him what is rightfully his." "He's not my grandson," Andrew punched the air. "Even if he were Mary Grace's son, that doesn't prove he's my blood." It was then that Grandma Sophie, who had remained silent then stepped forward. The elderly woman, bent by the years, walked slowly until she was face to face with Andrew. "You want proof, Andrew Miller," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Then I'll give it to you." From inside her torn handbag, she took out an envelope, even older than the others. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "Mary Grace left this with me before departing this life. She said I should only show it if one day it became necessary." It was a birth certificate. The father's name was clearly written, Andrew Miller. The date showed that Jack had been born exactly 9 months after Mary Grace left the ranch. The crowd came closer to see the document. Murmurs spread quickly, and soon everyone knew what was written there. "This is forgery," shouted Andrew, trying to grab the paper. "Anyone can make a fake document." "Andrew," Beth held her husband's arm, "stop this. You're humiliating yourself in front of the entire town. I won't humiliate myself in front of anyone, much less in front of a cripple who—" Andrew stopped talking when he saw the expression of horror on the faces of the people around. "Finish the sentence," said a calm but dangerous voice. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Colonel Jack, the most respected man in the region, who had arrived mounted on his white horse. Even at 70, his presence commanded respect. "Colonel," Andrew went pale. Colonel Jack was one of the few people in the region whom he respected and feared. "Finish the sentence, Andrew," the colonel repeated, dismounting from his horse. You were going to say a cripple who what? I wasn't going to say anything. Of course you were. Colonel Jack came closer, his gaze severe. You were going to disrespect this boy because of his disability, a boy who has shown more courage in 2 days than you have in your entire life. Colonel, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, the colonel interrupted. I see a coward who doesn't want to assume his responsibilities. You made a public bet, Andrew. Your word was given before witnesses. And now you want to back out because the result wasn't what you expected. Jack observed everything in silence, still trying to process all the revelations. Discovering that Andrew was his grandfather was something he had never imagined, and, now seeing the man's resistance to accepting him, he felt a mixture of sadness and anger. I don't need your money, Jack said suddenly, surprising everyone. Nor do I want to be your grandson. Jack? Grandma Sophie tried to speak, but the boy continued. I came here because I thought I could change my life, but I discovered that money is worth nothing if it comes from someone who has no honor. Andrew was surprised by the boy's words. He had expected pleased tears, not this dignity that made him feel even smaller. But I want one thing, Jack continued, looking directly into Andrew's eyes. I want you to publicly admit that I won the bet. I want you to acknowledge that it was I who tamed Thunder. And why would I do that? Because it's the truth, Jack approached his grandfather, and because deep down you know I'm right. Andrew looked at his grandson, seeing for the first time beyond the physical disability. He saw the courage, the determination, the dignity that the boy carried, and for the first time he recognized traces of himself in that young face. Besides, Jack continued, I want to take Thunder with me. What? Andrew took a step back. Are you crazy? Thunder is worth more than $1,000. He's worth more than money. Jack caressed the horse's muzzle, which had approached during the conversation. He's my friend, and I am his. Thunder snorted softly, as if agreeing with the boy's words. The connection between them was so evident that even Andrew couldn't deny it. Andrew, Colonel Jack placed his hand on the rancher's shoulder, you have a chance to exit this situation with a bit of dignity. Acknowledge that the boy won. Let him take the horse, and perhaps people will remember you as someone who, in the end, did the right thing. The silence extended for long minutes. Andrew looked at Jack, at Thunder, at the crowd waiting for his decision. His reputation as a powerful and feared man was in ruins, but perhaps he could still save something of his honor. All right, he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. You won the bet. You can take the horse. The crowd exploded in applause. Jack felt tears of relief running down his face, and Grandma Sophie ran to hug him. But I want to make one thing clear, Andrew continued, recovering part of his authority. This doesn't mean I'm acknowledging kinship. You won a bet, nothing more. Jack nodded, understanding that this was the most he would get from that proud and wounded man. I don't need you to recognize me as your grandson, he said. I have Grandma Sophie, and she's worth more than any grandfather. Beth approached Jack, taking the necklace from her neck. Take this, she said, placing the necklace in the boy's hands. It belonged to your mother. Now it's rightfully yours. Jack held the necklace, feeling the weight of the history it carried. It was an inheritance much more valuable than any money. Thank you, he said, looking at Beth with gratitude. And thank you for defending the truth. As people began to disperse, commenting on the day's events, Jack mounted Thunder for the second time. This time, however, it wasn't to fulfill a bet. It was to go home, to begin a new life alongside his most faithful friend. A week had passed since the events at Victory Ranch, and Jack Gardner's life had completely changed. The news of his victory had spread throughout the region, and people came from far away to meet the boy who had tamed Thunder. In the small plot behind Grandma Sophie's house, Jack had improvised an enclosure for Thunder using old wood and the help of supportive neighbors. The horse seemed happy in his new home, even though it was much simpler than the luxurious corrals of the ranch. Good morning, Thunder, said Jack, approaching with a brush in his hand. Today we're going to have important visitors. The horse snorted cheerfully, lowering his head to receive the morning caresses. Since arriving there, Thunder seemed like a completely different animal. The savage fury had given way to a docility that impressed those who had known him before. "Jack Gardner," a familiar voice called him from the gate. It was Colonel Jack, accompanied by two well-dressed men whom Jack didn't know. "Good morning, Colonel," Jack greeted, limping to the gate. "Good morning, my young man. I brought some people who wanted to meet you." One of the men in a blue suit and tie approached with a smile on his face. "Jack, my name is Robert Silver. I'm a businessman from Austin. I heard about your story and came to make a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "I want to hire you to perform at fairs and events in the region. You and Thunder could travel, show this special connection you have. I would pay well, very well." Jack was surprised by the offer. He had never imagined that his ability with Thunder could become a profession. He'd need to think and talk to my grandmother. Of course, said Robert, handing him a card. "Think carefully, but know that this could be the chance to definitely change your life." After the men left, Jack became thoughtful, brushing Thunder while reflecting on the possibilities that were opening up before him. "What do you think, friend?" he asked the horse. "Would you like to travel? See new places?" Thunder raised his head and looked directly into Jack's eyes, as if he perfectly understood the question. That afternoon, while Jack was helping Grandma Sophie in the yard, she noticed that her grandson was quieter than normal. "What's worrying you, my boy?" Jack told her about the businessman's proposal, about the possibility of traveling and earning money with performances. "And what is your heart saying?" "It's saying that it could be good. We could get out of poverty, Grandma. You could get your treatments. I could study. But I'm also thinking about what happened to my mom." Jack held the necklace that Beth had given him. "She had to leave here to try to build a better life. Wouldn't I be doing the same thing?" Grandma Sophie stopped hanging clothes on the line and approached her grandson. "Jack Gardner, your mother left because she had no choice. You have one, and that makes all the difference." At that moment, knocking on the door interrupted the conversation. Jack went to answer and was surprised to see Beth standing outside, carrying a basket in her hands. "Mrs. Beth, you came all the way here." "I came to bring some things for you," she said, showing the basket full of fruit, cheese, and bread. "And to talk with you." Grandma Sophie appeared at the door and invited Beth in. The two women greeted each other with the typical courtesy of rural Texas, but there was a palpable tension in the air. "How is Mr. Andrew?" asked Jack. Beth sighed deeply before answering. "Andrew is different. Since that day, he hardly leaves his office. He stays looking out the window in the direction where Thunder used to be." "Is he sorry?" "I think so, but he's too proud to admit it." Beth sat in the chair that Grandma Sophie had offered. "That's why I came here, to ask you something." "What is it?" "I want you to visit him." Jack was surprised by the request. "He doesn't want to see me. He made that very clear." "He needs to see you," Beth insisted. "Jack, Andrew isn't a bad man. He's just a man who made mistakes and doesn't know how to fix them." "Mrs. Beth," Grandma Sophie interjected in the conversation, "with all due respect, that man had the chance to do the right thing and chose pride." "I know," Beth lowered her head, "but he's been my husband for 30 years. I know his flaws, but I also know his heart. And I know he's suffering." Jack looked at Thunder, who was grazing peacefully in the improvised enclosure. "And what if I go there and he throws me out again?" "Then at least you tried," Beth replied. "Sometimes, Jack, greatness isn't in winning, but in giving a second chance to those who don't deserve it." That night, Jack could barely sleep. The businessman's proposal, Beth's request, the changes in his life, everything seemed to be happening too fast. The next morning, he made a decision. He prepared Thunder as he always did, but this time with a different goal in mind. "We're going to make a visit, friend," he said, mounting the horse, "a visit that could change everything." Grandma Sophie watched her grandson leave with a mixture of pride and concern. She knew that Jack was making a difficult decision, but she also knew that it was a decision that only he could make. The ride to Victory Ranch had never seemed so long. Jack felt his heart racing with each step of Thunder, imagining how he would be received, if he would be received at all. When they reached the ranch gate, they found it closed. There was no crowd, no movement. It was as if the place had lost its life after the events of the previous week. Jack dismounted and opened the gate, guiding Thunder onto the property. His steps echoed through the empty yard, breaking the sepulchral silence that had settled there. "Mr. Andrew," he shouted, "I came to talk to you." The door of the main house opened slowly, and Andrew appeared. He was visibly thinner, with deep circles under his eyes and an expression that Jack had never seen before. Vulnerability. "What do you want here?" asked Andrew, but his voice didn't carry the aggression of before. "I came to say goodbye," Jack replied. "I'm going to travel. A businessman offered me work in other towns." Andrew came down the porch steps, slowly approaching Jack and Thunder. "It's a good opportunity for you," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "Yes? But before I leave, I wanted you to know something." "What?" Jack took a deep breath before speaking. "I wanted you to know that I don't hold a grudge. I understand that you don't want to recognize me as your grandson. But I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Andrew was confused. "For giving me the chance to meet Thunder. For showing me that I can be much more than people think." Andrew looked at the horse, which was calmly observing him. For a moment, his eyes filled with tears that he tried to hide. "Thunder was always special," he murmured. "Since he was small, he never let anyone get close, except my mother," Jack completed. Andrew nodded, unable to speak. The barriers he had built around his heart were beginning to crumble, and he didn't know how to deal with the feelings that were emerging. The silence extended between grandfather and grandson, broken only by the wind rustling the leaves of the oak trees. Andrew looked at Jack as if seeing him for the first time, no longer as an inconvenient stranger, but as the reflection of a past that he had tried to forget. "Your mother," Andrew began, his voice trembling, "she really had a special gift." Jack waited in silence, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. "Mary Grace arrived here when she was 17, looking for work," Andrew continued, sitting on the porch steps. "She was proud, determined, wouldn't accept charity from anyone, just like you." Thunder approached slowly, as if he also wanted to hear the story. "She managed to calm my first wild horse, a stallion that not even my father had been able to tame. That's when I fell in love with her," Andrew smiled sadly. "Not for what she did, but for the way she looked at the animal. With respect, with love, as if she could see beyond the fury." "Then why didn't you marry her?" asked Jack. Andrew was silent for long minutes, fighting against the pride that had dominated him for so many years. "Because I was a coward," he finally admitted. "My father wanted me to marry Beth, the daughter of a rich rancher. It would be a union that would strengthen our business, and I gave in to the pressure. And my mother? She found out about the engagement and came to see me. Said she was expecting my child." Tears finally began to stream down Andrew's face. "I could have cancelled everything, could have taken my responsibility, but I chose the easier path." Jack felt a mixture of anger and pity for the man who was before him. "I offered her money," Andrew continued, his voice almost a whisper. "Told her that if she went away and never came back, I would give her everything she needed to raise the child." "Did she accept?" "She threw the money in my face and said she would rather starve than accept anything from me." Andrew laughed bitterly. "She left the same day and I never saw her again." Thunder approached Andrew and, to everyone's surprise, gently rested his muzzle on the man's shoulder. It was the first time the horse had shown affection for anyone besides Jack. "He feels that you're suffering," said Jack, caressing Thunder's neck. "Animals know things that we humans forget," murmured Andrew. "They know when someone needs forgiveness." "Mr. Andrew," Jack approached his grandfather, "my mother never spoke ill of you. Until the end, she said I was a child of love, even if that love hadn't worked out." Andrew raised his eyes, surprised. "She said that?" "She did. And she taught me that forgiveness isn't something we give to others, but something we give to ourselves to be free." At that moment, Beth appeared on the porch, bringing a tray with coffee and cookies. Her eyes were red, indicating that she had heard the entire conversation. "Andrew," she said softly, "you've carried this guilt for 15 years. Don't you think it's time to forgive yourself?" "How can I forgive myself, Beth? I lost the chance to know my daughter, to be grandfather to this extraordinary boy. You haven't lost it. Jack came closer. You still can be. Andrew looked at his grandson, incredulous. Would you forgive me after everything I did? I already have, replied Jack, extending his hand. The question is, can you forgive yourself? Andrew looked at his grandson's extended hand, then at Beth, then at Thunder. 3 generations of love awaiting his answer. With tears flowing freely, he took Jack's hand. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for everything. I know, Jack smiled. And now? Do you want to really get to know your grandson? Andrew nodded, unable to speak. Beth came down the steps and embraced them both, forming a circle of forgiveness that had taken 15 years to close. Jack, said Andrew when he managed to compose himself, about that job offer. Oh, that. I decided I won't accept it. Why not? Because I discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures happen when we stay. Jack looked at the ranch around them. Besides, someone needs to teach you how to properly handle Thunder. Andrew laughed, a sound that hadn't come from his throat in a long time. Would you do that? Would you stay here and teach me? Of course, but with one condition. What? I want you to build a school on the ranch, a school for all the children in the region, including those who have disabilities like me. Andrew was surprised by the request. A school. My mother always said that education is the only thing that no one can take away from us, explained Jack. I want other children to have the chance that I didn't have. It's done, said Andrew without hesitation. We'll build the best school in the region. Beth smiled, seeing the husband she knew resurface from beneath years of bitterness. And there's one more thing, said Jack, smiling mischievously. I want you to teach me how to be a real rancher. Thunder will need a dignified life in his old age. It would be an honor, replied Andrew, proud of the grandson he had found. That afternoon, as the sun set on the Texas horizon, 3 generations walked together through the pastures of Victory Ranch, Jack mounted on Thunder, Andrew and Beth beside him, planning the future they would build together. Grandpa, said Jack, trying out the word for the first time. Yes, my grandson. Thank you for making that bet. Without it, maybe we would never have found each other. No, Andrew caressed Thunder's muzzle. Who brought us together was your mother. She knew that one day this moment would come. Grandma Sophie was waiting for them at the ranch gate, accompanied by several people from town who had come to learn about the meeting. When they saw the 3 arriving together, smiling, they spontaneously applauded. Looks like the story had a happy ending, commented Father Anthony. It's not an ending, Jack corrected, dismounting from Thunder. It's a beginning. And it truly was. In the months that followed, Victory Ranch was transformed. The school was built and became a reference in the region. Jack and Andrew worked together, the grandson teaching his grandfather the secret language of animals, the grandfather teaching his grandson the secrets of the land. Thunder became not only the most famous horse in Texas, but also the riding teacher for the school children, always patient and affectionate under Jack's supervision. Beth found her true calling in the education of special children, and Grandma Sophie moved to the ranch, where she came to be treated as the family matriarch she always deserved to be. And so in the heart of Texas, a family reunited not because of the blood that united them, but because of the love they chose to cultivate. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won by taming wild horses, but by taming our own fears and pride that keep us distant from those we love. In the end, Jack Gardner had achieved much more than money. He had achieved what every heart seeks, a place to belong, people to love, and the certainty that no matter how difficult the path, there is always a second chance for those who have the courage to extend their hand and